During the Second World War, there were many different countries who collaborated with the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. A number of armies collaborated and fought alongside the German army and the Wehrmacht and were witnesses to some of the most evil executions and crimes of the conflict. Inside of Hungary, the Nazis would eventually occupy the country. They would cause chaos inside the land, deporting hundreds of thousands of people to concentration camps. After the war had come to an end, the Hungarian people who had suffered significantly sought to punish those who collaborated, and they carried out a number of executions of people who were responsible for the persecution. Many politicians were then taken to makeshift firing ranges or gallows, where they were then executed for their crimes, and one man who was condemned was Laszlo Endre. He was a man who was a politician who had sided with others who were responsible for evil laws that caused wide-scale depravity. But he was a man who also directly was involved in the deportations of thousands to concentration camps such as Auschwitz. Join us today as we look at the execution of Laszlo Endre, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Laszlo Endre was born on the 1st of January 1895, and he was born into a very wealthy family. But he would then go to university to study political science following a period in service in the Austro-Hungarian army. He saw service on the Western Front, but then after defeating the army, he became a local government officer. But Endre was then involved in the right-wing nationalist movement known as MOVE. But he then developed a reputation for brutality and for being incredibly cruel, and he then wormed his way into a role inside of the Hungarian National Socialist Party, and he would be involved in recruitment and organising movements for the party. This political group was of course inspired in a sense by the Nazi Party, and despite just being a minor party in the country before the war broke out, it did attract a significant degree of supporters, and they were also brutally antisemitic, and they encouraged the persecutions of other people. However, in 1938, he became part of the government and governing party of Bela Endre. Endre had begun his career in politics as pro-British, but then, after a number of high-profile resignations and sackings, he was made the Prime Minister of Hungary. But soon Endre realised he was upsetting Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, the dictators of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. They saw him as an enemy to begin with, but then Endre realised that he needed to please these two nations, and he started to move his government and country closer to the ideas of the Nazis. He would realise that Hungary could be helped financially by these two also, and his government then began to harass other opposition and opponents in brutal ways. But Endre would be shockingly ousted from power after being in office for less than a year, as his opponents went to the Hungarian regent with claims that his great-grandfather was in fact Jewish, and Endre was accused of being a hypocrite, as he was persecuting Jews inside of his country, and he was then forced to step down. But inside of Imre's government, right-wing figures such as Laszlo Endre were given positions and platforms of influence, and Endre became one of the leading anti-Semitic voices that the Prime Minister would listen to on a regular basis. He believed that the Hungarian government's anti-Jewish laws and the persecution they were involved in was not strong enough, and he favoured the laws that the Nazis had and wanted them introducing to Hungary. He managed to push through his agenda, and he was responsible for further laws that placed more restrictions on Jews. His laws banned them from visiting beaches and spas, and also banned Jewish people from working at fairs and making money, but his laws would later be reversed when they briefly fell from power. But still, as the Second World War was going on, Laszlo Endre was not a major figure in government, and he was in a sense working in the shadows. But his rise to power came later, in 1944, as Hitler, who was fed up of Hungary's hesitancy to become fully behind the German war effort, ordered a huge invasion and occupation of Hungary. Hungarian units had suffered heavily during the Battle of Stalingrad, and following this the regent realised that the Germans would probably lose the war. There were talks of a separate armistice being agreed for Hungary and the Western Allies, but to prevent this happening, Hitler got wind of this and ordered the occupation. The Nazis now occupied the country, and if there wasn't a reason for people to fear for their lives before, it was now a real possibility that terror would come to their lives and their streets. The Nazi occupiers got rid of a tolerant government headed up by Prime Minister Miklos Kalash, and they then forced the regent to replace him with a Nazi sympathiser. But the Nazis wanted the new rulers in Hungary to be on their side, and the Nazis also prioritised the final solution inside of the country. They wanted the quick extermination of the country's Jews, who had been suffering through persecution. Laszlo Endre was viewed by the Nazis as an expert on this matter, and he was very anti-Semitic. He was appointed the State Secretary in the Minister of the Interior in the Nazi-controlled government under the Interior Minister Andor Jaros. However, Endre, despite being a number 2, would be given huge and shocking powers to cause mass suffering. He was able to put thousands of people into established ghettos and then deport hundreds of thousands of Jews out of the country to concentration camps. He was a man who helped Adolf Eichmann deport over 400,000 Hungarian Jews between May and July 1944. The majority of these were then sent to Auschwitz, where Operation Höss was enacted, and these people were then gassed in 56 murderous days at the site. The Hungarian Jews killed in this quick spate amassed to around half of all those who were killed at Auschwitz, the largest concentration camp of the Second World War. But Andre's brutality was wide-reaching, and the regent Miklos Horthy learned of this, and he then ordered his sacking from the Interior Ministry, and he was disgusted with his involvement in the deportations. The regent would bring these to an end, but Andre was then sacked, but within a month he came back to government. The Nazis were ousted from the country as the Soviet Union approached, and Andre was then appointed as the Commissioner of Civil Administration, with Ferenc Szalasi's Arrow Cross Party rising to power. But then in March 1945, Budapest would crumble to the Red Army, as they brought war to the doorsteps of the Hungarian capital. Andre knew he would be sought after, and he knew he would be a wanted man, and because of this he fled to Austria, hoping to escape justice, but he was later captured and was then extradited back to his nation for punishment by his own people. In December 1943, months after the Second World War had come to an end, Laszlo Endre was brought to trial in Budapest, and he was accused of crimes against humanity and in being a collaborator with the Nazis. It did not take long until he was found guilty of the murder of the Jews and of acting against the national interests of Hungary. For this he was sentenced to death, and there were a number of politicians who were also condemned. But he was to be executed with the Austro-Hungarian pole hanging method, and this was where the condemned stood in front of a pole, which was 3 metres high. Then ropes and pulleys were attached to their feet, and the rope would be passed around the body and through loops around the prisoner's neck, and a chest sling would then be released, and the condemned person would then be left hanging. Laszlo Endre was flanked by guards who brought him to his pole, along with another man, and the ropes were then secured and a white cap was placed over his head before the rope was dropped and he was left hanging. Within minutes, he was dead. Laszlo Endre was a Hungarian politician who was responsible for the deaths of thousands of people who were sent to camps such as Auschwitz. He was a very evil man, whose actions would condemn many people inside of the worst hells on earth. But he was a man who was in league with the terrible members of the SS, and he was considered an architect of the mass slaughter of innocent people. But inside of Budapest, in front of a sizable crowd, this former politician was executed for his crimes. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.